There is a Haagen-Dazs store in a town called Lake Sumter Landing in central Florida that has a brass historical plaque on its front wall. The plaque, credited to the Lake Sumter Landing Historical Preservation League, explains that a man named Oscar Feliu purchased this small warehouse building on the waterfront in 1906 and ran a successful bait and tackle shop for the many sportsmen who came to fish the lake. Next door, another plaque describes how a telegraph office once stood on that spot, and a vintage photograph hangs on the exterior to prove it. It is a charming scene, the kind of thing you find in old southern towns that have been around for 150 years, places with real stories layered into the brick and the mortar. Except none of it is true. There was no Oscar Feliu. There was no bait shop. The Haagen-Dazs building was not built in 1906. It was built in the late 1990s. The lake where Oscar's customers supposedly fished was not there either. It was dug by a construction crew, also in the 1990s. The photograph on the telegraph office was not taken anywhere near this location, and the Lake Sumter Landing Historical Preservation League, the organization that authored all of these plaques with such convincing authority, does not exist and has never existed. Every word on every plaque is fiction, installed by a real estate developer in a community that now holds more than 150,000 people, spread across 3 Florida counties, generating a gross domestic product of $5.5 billion a year. The place is called The Villages, and understanding how it came to be requires starting not in Florida, but in Chicago, with a man who sold land to strangers through the mail. Harold Schwartz was born in 1910 on the south side of Chicago, the son of Louis and Catherine Schwartz. He was Jewish, scrappy, entrepreneurial in the way that a lot of Depression-era Chicagoans were, willing to try anything that moved money from one pocket to another. By the 1950s, Schwartz had assembled an unlikely portfolio of businesses. He ran a direct mail advertising operation, managed radio stations with a partner named Teo Bichara, one of whom helped launch Wolfman Jack's career, oversaw other stations in Denver and Salt Lake City, manufactured cameras in Japan for Sears, and invested in real estate in Las Vegas and St. Louis. He was not a man with a single vision. He was a man with many irons in many fires, and the hottest fire, for a while, was selling land. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Schwartz and his team would buy large tracts of undeveloped land in warm climate states, Florida, New Mexico, the Caribbean, and then sell individual parcels to northern buyers through mail-order advertisements. The ads ran in newspapers across the Midwest and the Northeast, painting pictures of citrus groves and balmy winters, promising a piece of the Florida dream to factory workers and school teachers who had never been south of Kentucky. A typical deal was $10 down and $10 a month. The buyer received a deed to a small piece of Florida that they might never visit, but owning it made them feel like they had a foothold in paradise. Thousands of people bought in. The business hummed. And Schwartz was hardly alone. By the mid-1960s, retirement communities like Del Webb's Sun City in the Tampa area and the Century Villages in South Florida were flourishing, and the mail-order land business was feeding a larger migration that was reshaping the entire state. Then, in 1968, Congress passed the Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act, which effectively banned the kind of mail-order land selling that Schwartz had built his business on. The law required detailed property reports and disclosures that made the old buy-by-mail model unworkable. Schwartz was left holding thousands of acres of Florida land that he could no longer sell the way he had been selling it. His business partner, Al Tarson, decided he wanted to slow down and move to Fort Lauderdale. Together, the two men looked at their unsold acreage in northwestern Lake County, flat, rolling pasture land about an hour northwest of Orlando, the kind of land that in 1959 had sold for roughly $150 an acre, and decided to try something different. They would build a mobile home park. They called it Orange Blossom Gardens. In the early 1970s, it was a modest operation, a collection of mobile home pads on cheap land, marketed as an affordable place for retirees to spend their winters. The location was not promising. It sat in northwestern Lake County, far from the coast, far from any major city, in a part of Florida that most people drove through on the way to somewhere else. The nearest town of any size was Ocala, about 25 miles north. Orlando was an hour to the southeast. The land was flat, studded with small lakes, and had been used for cattle grazing for as long as anyone could remember. Schwartz and Tarson were not trying to build an empire. They were trying to recoup an investment, and for a decade that is more or less what Orange Blossom Gardens remained, a small mobile home park in the middle of nowhere, slowly filling with retirees from Michigan and Ohio and Indiana who wanted sunshine and low costs and not much else. By the early 1980s, it held fewer than 400 homes and showed no signs of becoming anything more. What changed everything was the arrival of Harold Schwartz's son. H. Gary Morse was born Harold Gary Schwartz on December 19, 1936, in Chicago. His parents divorced when he was 7, and his mother remarried a man named Clifford Morse, whose surname Gary eventually took. He grew up in Central Lake, Michigan, a tiny town near Torch Lake, and by the time he was in his 20s, he was working alongside his father in the advertising and land sales business. He was not, by most accounts, a man who attracted attention in a room. He preferred jeans and an old cowboy hat. He did not give interviews. He did not seek publicity. But he had something his father lacked, a vision so specific, so consuming, and so carefully thought through that it would eventually reshape 57 square miles of rural Florida into the largest retirement community the world has ever seen. Morse arrived in Central Florida in 1983, at age 46, to take over his father's struggling operation. Orange Blossom Gardens had about 386 mobile homes and no particular future. Schwartz had bought out Tarson's share, and the two Schwartzes, father and son, were now alone with their land. The first thing Morse did was study the competition. Del Webb's Sun City, near Tampa, was the model, a retirement community that offered more than just a place to sleep, one that built golf courses and recreation centers and created a sense of active, purposeful living for people over 55. Morse saw what Sun City had done and understood that Orange Blossom Gardens as a trailer park would never compete. So he stopped selling trailers and started building houses. This was not a small decision. The existing mobile home builders had established businesses, and Morse had to manage the transition carefully, helping them pivot to site-built construction while keeping the revenue flowing. By 1986, he was selling more than 500 homes a year. He added swimming pools, recreation centers, a golf course. He opened a bank. The population of nearby Lady Lake swelled from about 3,000 to more than 10,000, almost entirely because of what was growing on its western edge. By 1988, Orange Blossom Gardens had outgrown its original footprint. The development needed to expand across U.S. Highway 27/441 into Sumter County, a complicated undertaking that required coordination with multiple county governments and the state's Development of Regional Impact process. Harold Schwartz, now nearing 80, decided they could not stop halfway. They converted their old offices into recreation centers and built a striking new facility on the other side of the highway, which brought the community its first bowling alley, its first supermarket, its first shopping center, and its first site-built homes outside the original trailer park footprint. In the early 1990s, a golf course went up on the new side of the highway. Schwartz's second son, Richard, joined as golf director. The La Hacienda Hotel opened its first phase, and in 1992, the community got a new name. Orange Blossom Gardens became The Villages, the plural noun reflecting the fact that the development was now a collection of distinct neighborhoods, each with its own identity, spreading across the landscape like an organism that had learned to feed itself. And then Morse did the thing that turned a successful retirement development into something unprecedented. As the story goes, and it has become part of the community's mythology, Morse was at dinner one night with his wife Sharon and some guests, and he sketched his vision for a town square on a napkin. Not just a shopping center, not a strip mall, a town square built from scratch, designed to look and feel like the kind of downtown that small-town America used to have, the kind that had been dying for decades as Walmarts and interstates hollowed out main streets across the country. The napkin sketch became Spanish Springs Town Square, which opened in 1994. It had adobe-colored buildings with viga-studded walls, red-tiled roofs, wrought-iron balconies, bubbling fountains, and a central gazebo where live entertainment would be performed every single night. Not occasionally, not seasonally, every night of the year, 365 days running. Palm trees lined the walkways. A bell tower anchored the central church-like structure. A theater called the Rialto, one of the first movie theaters in the villages, gave the square an anchor of its own. It was designed to feel like a plaza in Santa Fe, transplanted to the Florida flatlands, and it worked in a way that even Morse might not have anticipated. Residents did not just visit, they came every evening. They parked their golf carts, some of them already festooned with college pennants and old license plates from their previous homes in Michigan and Ohio. And they danced, they ate, they lingered, they sat in the square until the music stopped, and then they drove home through the warm Florida dark on their cart paths, and they came back the next night and did it again. Morse had figured out what he was really selling, and it was not houses or golf or weather. He said it himself to a reporter from Florida Trend. We're not necessarily selling homes, we're selling happiness. But happiness, it turned out, needed a backstory. This is where the plaques come in. As the villages expanded, Spanish Springs in 1994, then Lake Sumter Landing Market Square in the early 2000s, then Brownwood Paddock Square, which opened on October 12, 2012, with a Western ranch theme evoking Florida's 19th century cattlemen, Morse and his team made a decision that was either brilliant marketing or something more unsettling, depending on your tolerance for manufactured reality. They gave each town square a fictional history. Spanish Springs was themed as a centuries-old Spanish village. Lake Sumter Landing was presented as a quaint lakeside port town with a history stretching back to the early 1900s. Brownwood was built to evoke old world Florida, the era of cattlemen and cowboys. And on nearly every storefront, in all three squares, they installed historical plaques describing the businesses that had supposedly occupied these buildings in previous decades. A butcher here, a dry goods store there, a blacksmith, a printer. Founding families were named. Local eccentrics were memorialized. A folk legend called The Legend of Bocephus was inscribed on Lake Sumter's boardwalk. None of it had happened. Every name, every date, every anecdote was invented. The buildings were new. The towns had no prior existence. The preservation leagues credited on the plaques were fictional organizations created by the developer's marketing team. As one historian observed, the plaques served the role of set decorators rather than archivists. The villages had taken the concept of themed entertainment, the thing Walt Disney had perfected 40 miles to the southeast, and applied it not to a theme park, but to a place where people actually lived. 150,000 people going about their daily lives, surrounded by a fabricated past that their community had authored for itself. And here is the part that would make a finance person sit up straight. Residents didn't just accept the manufactured history. Many of them loved it. The plaques gave the town squares a warmth, a texture, a sense of having been somewhere before, even though none of them had ever been to these particular buildings in these particular configurations. It was nostalgia without a referent, a memory of something that had never happened. and it sold. Morse's business model was, in retrospect, a stroke of structural genius. He built free golf courses, the executive courses, the shorter ones, available to any resident who paid the monthly amenity fee, and placed them at the center of each neighborhood cluster. Then he built a network of golf cart paths that funneled residents from those courses directly to his shopping centers, his restaurants, his commercial squares. The courses were a loss leader. The real money was in what happened after the 18th hole, when a couple in a golf cart would stop for lunch, pick up groceries, browse a boutique, and maybe schedule a checkup at the village's health clinic, all without ever leaving the Morse family's commercial ecosystem. The free golf courses were the bait, the cart paths were the line, and the town squares, with their nightly entertainment, their restaurants, their shops, were the hook. What also sold was the financing structure. Morse did not build the villages with his own money. He built it in large part with yours, or rather, with a mechanism so clever that it deserves its own chapter in the history of American real estate. Community Development Districts, or CDDs, are special purpose units of local government authorized under Chapter 190 of the Florida statutes. They allow a developer to establish a government entity, issue tax-exempt bonds, use the bond proceeds to build infrastructure, roads, water systems, sewer lines, street lights, golf courses, recreation centers, and then repay those bonds through special assessments levied on the homeowners who move into the finished community. The developer controls the CDD board, at least initially, because board seats are allocated by land ownership, and the developer owns all the land before any homes are sold. As homes sell and residents move in, they begin paying the bond assessments on their property tax bills, typically around $200 to $400 a month on top of regular taxes. And those payments flow back to the bondholders who funded the construction. What this means in practice is that Morse could build an entire city's worth of infrastructure without putting up much of his own capital. The roads, the bridges, the tunnels, the 100-plus miles of golf cart paths, the dozen golf cart overpasses, the recreation centers, the swimming pools, all of it was financed by bonds that the residents themselves would repay over 30 years. A typical new homeowner in the villages carries a CDD bond balance of around $54,000, financed at roughly 5% over 30 years, which shows up as a line item on their property tax bill. On top of that, there is an annual CDD maintenance assessment for the upkeep of common areas, the landscaping, the streetlights, the retention ponds, the road maintenance. Combined, these CDD charges often run between $200 and $400 a month, depending on the age of the home and the district. And on top of that, every homeowner pays the monthly amenity fee, currently around $200, for access to the recreation centers and pools and golf courses. The total monthly cost of being a villager before mortgage and property taxes can easily reach $500 or $600. But the crucial point is this: the bond money goes to pay for infrastructure that the developer built. The amenity fee goes to the developer's company for access to facilities that the developer owns. Meanwhile, Morse retained ownership of the commercial property, the restaurants, the shopping centers, the golf cart dealership, the newspaper, the radio station, the television channel, the bank, the insurance company, and later the hospital system. The residents paid for the infrastructure. Morse kept the businesses. By 2011, the holding company of the Villages Limited was generating at least $550 million in annual revenue. Morse owned, by one reporter's accounting, just about everything in the community. 4.5 million square feet of commercial space, dozens of restaurants and retail outlets, and a sprawling network of service companies that handled everything from trash collection to utilities. The amenity fee alone, a monthly charge that every homeowner pays for access to the recreation centers, pools, and executive golf courses, was bringing in tens of millions of dollars a year from 70,000 households. In 2008, A class action lawsuit alleged that Morse had misused those amenity fees, and the case was settled for $40 million over 13 years, with an additional $6.7 million in attorney's fees. Morse denied wrongdoing. The community kept growing, and it grew at a pace that the U.S. Census Bureau had never seen before. In the early 2000s, the villages had about 25,000 residents. By 2010, it had 93,000. By 2020, it had crossed 130,000, making it the fastest-growing metropolitan statistical area in the United States for the entire decade. Faster than Austin, faster than Myrtle Beach, faster than any boomtown in Texas. The growth rate was 39% in 10 years. No other metro area in America came within 10 percentage points. The Census Bureau had to reclassify what had been empty pastureland in Sumter County as its own metropolitan area, because nothing else in the federal statistical system could account for a place this large, this dense, and this new. The engine of that growth was not just the town squares or the golf or the weather. It was the golf carts. Morse understood, perhaps before anyone else, that the golf cart was not a toy or a luxury. It was a transportation system. He built the villages with more than 100 miles of dedicated multimodal paths that connected every neighborhood to every shopping plaza, recreation center, restaurant, and town square. He built 12 bridges and tunnels so that golf carts could cross major highways without encountering a single car. He designed parking lots at every commercial destination with dedicated golf cart spaces. The result was a community where an 80-year-old could wake up in the morning, drive a golf cart to breakfast, then to a doctor's appointment, then to a round of golf, then to dinner and a live show at the town square, and never once sit behind the wheel of a car. The average resident drives their golf cart between 3,500 and 5,000 miles per year, not on golf courses, but on errands, on social calls, on the commute from home to life. A married couple typically owns 2. Estimates of the golf cart population vary. There is no official registry, but most figures converge somewhere between 70,000 and 100,000 carts in active use. More golf carts than registered automobiles. More golf carts than many American cities have cars of any kind. Even the local Walmart has designated golf cart parking. The carts themselves have become a form of self-expression, tricked out with custom paint jobs, lifted suspensions, sound systems, and enclosures that make them look like miniature Jeeps or vintage roadsters. A cottage industry of customization shops has sprung up to serve the demand. The residents who drove those carts arrived overwhelmingly from the Midwest, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and they arrived with a particular set of expectations. They wanted the small-town life they remembered from their childhoods, or from their parents' stories, or from some collective American memory that television and movies had shaped over half a century. They wanted to know their neighbors. They wanted a Main Street. They wanted a newspaper that covered their community, not some distant metropolis. And Morse gave them all of it. The village's Daily Sun, which Morse owned, was a broadsheet newspaper with a circulation approaching 50,000, covering the community with the earnestness and granularity of a small-town paper. Club schedules, recreation center news, local politics, obituaries. 92% of residents reportedly read it. In an era when newspapers everywhere were dying, the Daily Sun was thriving, its pages thick with advertisements for real estate agents, doctors, golf cart accessories, and restaurants, all of which were, directly or indirectly, part of the Morse family's business ecosystem. And Morse himself was becoming something more than a developer. He was becoming a political force. The village's population was overwhelmingly white, more than 96% non-Hispanic white, according to the 2010 census, and overwhelmingly Republican. There were twice as many registered Republicans as Democrats. For a generation of GOP candidates, a stop at the villages became as essential as a stop in Iowa or New Hampshire. Sarah Palin drew tens of thousands to a 2008 rally. Mitt Romney held fundraisers aboard Morse's 147-foot yacht, the Cracker Bay, during the 2012 Republican convention in Tampa. Morse served on Florida's Electoral College for George W. Bush. Between his personal contributions, his family's donations, and the checks written by various villages-affiliated corporate entities with names like Lazy B Cattle and 44A Partners, the Morse operation funneled millions of dollars into Republican campaigns at the state and federal level. In 2006, Morse made a $500,000 donation to the Florida Republican Party, the largest individual contribution in the party's history at that time. The villages and the Morse family collectively donated more than $1 million to state-level campaigns during the 2004, 2006, and 2010 election cycles. This kind of money buys a certain kind of protection, and Morse needed it. In 2008, the IRS began examining roughly $426 million in tax-exempt bonds that the Village Center Community Development District had issued between 1993 and 2004. The bond proceeds had paid for commercial development in the Spanish Springs area, the golf courses, the guardhouses, the amenities, all of which the CDDs had purchased from Morse, paying him millions in the process. The agency's concern was straightforward. The CDD boards were supposed to be elected by residents, but in the villages they were effectively controlled by the developer because board seats were allocated by land ownership, and the developer still owned the land. No residences existed within the 166-acre Village Center District. If the CDDs were not genuine political subdivisions, the bonds could not be tax-exempt, and thousands of bondholders would face back taxes on the interest they had earned. The investigation dragged on for 8 years. Politicians from both parties lobbied the IRS on behalf of the villages. The developers' most potent argument, ironically, came from the residents themselves, tens of thousands of retirees whose bond payments would be jeopardized if the tax-exempt status were revoked. And in July 2016, nearly 2 years after Gary Morse's death, the IRS closed the examination without imposing a single penalty. Not a dime was collected. Before he died, Morse made one more push. In 2012, he created the Village's Health, a network of primary care centers built on the idea of old-fashioned doctor-patient relationships, where physicians were compensated for quality rather than quantity, forming long-term bonds with their patients. It was a radical departure from the fee-for-service model that dominated American health care, and it was, Morse told people close to him, the legacy he cared about most. He wanted the villages to be known not just as Florida's friendliest hometown, but as America's healthiest hometown. He did not live to see it reach full maturity. Morse died on October 29, 2014, at the age of 77. The flags in the villages flew at half-staff. Governor Rick Scott mourned the loss. Senator Marco Rubio praised his vision. Jeb Bush called him a great friend. The man who had transformed 386 mobile homes into a city of more than 100,000 people, and had done it while remaining almost invisible to the public, walking around in jeans and a cowboy hat, rarely giving interviews, known to his own residents simply as the developer, was gone. His first wife, Sharon, for whom the Sharon Morse Performing Arts Center is named, had died in 1999. He left behind his second wife, Renee, and 3 children, Mark, Tracy, and Jennifer. In 2006, Morse had transferred ownership of the villages to those 3 children. By 2018, according to Bloomberg, the family's collective wealth had crossed $3 billion, making each of the 3 siblings a billionaire in their own right. Forbes had valued the family at $1.5 billion in 2015. The portfolio only grew from there. In 2024, Jennifer purchased a $21 million beachfront home on Gasparilla Island. The family sold off the bank in 2025. And in early 2026, the Villages hired its first non-family CEO, though Mark, Tracy, and Jennifer all remain actively involved in leadership. The machine their father built has not slowed down. It has, if anything, accelerated. The Villages' gross domestic product tripled from $1.8 billion in 2010 to $5.5 billion in 2021, a figure that would make it a mid-sized city's economy if it were incorporated as one. Between 2021 and 2022, the U.S. Census Bureau again declared the Villages the fastest-growing metro area in the country, with a one-year population increase of 7.5%. The community now spans 89 square miles across Lake, Marion, and Sumter counties, with more than 150,000 residents, over 118 distinct neighborhood villages, more than 700 holes of golf across 54 courses, more than 3,500 resident-run clubs, 109 recreation centers, 108 swimming pools, 235 pickleball courts, and over $300 million spent annually at its restaurants and retail centers. The average household income exceeds $73,000. The median home value is around $347,000. And the developer recently acquired 3,200 acres in Leesburg, south of Florida's Turnpike, for future expansion. Projections from the University of Florida's Bureau of Economic and Business Research suggest Sumter County will grow by another 67% by 2050. What does a place like this mean? That is a question people have been asking since the Villages first started showing up in census data as an outlier, and the answers tend to say more about the person answering than about the place itself. Critics call it a bubble. Inside the Bubble is literally the name of a popular blog about the community. They point to the racial homogeneity, the political uniformity, the fact that one family controls the newspaper and the commercial real estate and the hospital and the entertainment and the infrastructure financing. They note that the history is fake, the democracy is nominal, and the developers' interests are baked into every layer of governance. The fabricated plaques, from this angle, are not charming. They are a metaphor for a community that has traded authenticity for comfort. But spend time with the people who actually live there, as tens of thousands of visitors do every year, many of them on 3 to 7 night trial stays that the developer offers, complete with a loaner golf cart and a villa, and a different picture emerges. They are not dupes. Many of them know the plaques are fiction. They do not care, or they care in a way that is more sophisticated than dismissal. They appreciate the effort, the craft, the way it makes the town square feel like a town square instead of a shopping center. They came from places where the real downtown died, where the real movie theater closed, where the real diner was replaced by a chain. They watched it happen for 40 years. And when a developer in Florida offered them a version of what they had lost, imperfect, manufactured, maybe a little strange, they took it. They took it and they filled it with their own lives, their own friendships, their own clubs and dances and softball leagues and volunteer fire departments, until the manufactured thing became, in some functional sense, real. The amenity fee is around $200 a month. For that, a resident gets access to every recreation center, every pool, every executive golf course, live entertainment 365 nights a year, and a social infrastructure so dense that loneliness, the thing that kills more retirees than heart disease, some studies suggest, becomes genuinely difficult to sustain. 3,500 clubs, not 35, 3,500. There is a club for everything: Republican politics and Democratic politics, quilting and fly fishing, synchronized swimming and ukulele, pickleball and polo, watercolor painting and competitive cornhole. If a club does not exist for the thing you want to do, you can start one, and by next Tuesday there will be 8 people signed up. The Veterans Administration estimates that more than 19,000 veterans live in the Villages Metropolitan Statistical Area, more than any other area in the country without a military base. The community has its own zip codes, its own fire departments, its own public safety department. It has a performing arts center named for Morse's first wife, Sharon, that hosts Broadway touring productions. It has its own hydroponic farm. It is, in every meaningful sense, a city that was designed, built, owned, and operated by a single family, and that now has a larger population than Daytona Beach. 400 people a month move to the Villages. They arrive from Michigan and Ohio and New York and New Jersey, hauling U-Hauls down Interstate 75. And the first thing many of them do is buy a golf cart. Not because they play golf, many of them do not, but because the golf cart is how you get around. The golf cart is how you go to the grocery store and the doctor and the movie theater and the square. The golf cart is what makes the place feel like a small town instead of a suburb. The speed is slower, the world is closer, and you wave to people you know as you pass them on the path. In a country that designed its post-war landscape around the automobile, the Villages designed its landscape around a vehicle that tops out at 25 miles per hour. And people who spent their entire working lives on freeways now find that the best part of their day is the 7-minute cart ride to dinner. The land where all of this sits, every recreation center, every town square, every golf course, every mile of cart path, every tunnel and bridge and retention pond and artificial lake, was pastureland in 1959. Flat, rolling, unremarkable Florida interior, the kind of country that nobody looked at twice when they were busy dreaming about the coast. Cattle grazed where the recreation centers now stand. Palmetto scrub covered the ground where 85,000 golf carts now roll. The land sold for $150 an acre, and the men who sold it thought they were getting a fair price. A premier golf front lot in the Villages today goes for $100,000. A commercial acre fetches $350,000. The math on that transformation from $150 per acre to $100,000 per lot, with hundreds of lots per acre once you factor in the shared infrastructure, is the kind of math that keeps developers up at night, not with worry, but with wonder. Harold Schwartz, the Chicago ad man who bought the land because he could not sell it through the mail anymore, died in 2003 at the age of 93 in Lady Lake, Florida. He had lived long enough to see his pasture land become a city. The plaque on the Haagen-Dazs store is still there. Oscar Faliu, the man who never existed, still watches over the ice cream buyers from his brass memorial. The lake he supposedly fished is still there, too, its surface catching the late afternoon light, looking exactly like a lake that has been there for 100 years. Visitors take photographs. Some of them read the plaque and nod and move on. Some of them read it and then look up the history and discover that none of it happened. And some of them, a surprising number, read it and do not care whether it happened, because the ice cream is good and the music is starting across the square, and their neighbor just texted to say she saved them seats, and the evening is warm, and they are here, and it is enough.